My parents threw me away at age 10, like unwanted luggage. Not because I did anything wrong, but simply because I wasn't born a boy. And now that I've inherited a $27 million fortune, they've come crawling back. My father sat across from me at the breakfast table and told me I was being given away. No yelling, no tears, just that flat, efficient voice he used to close deals at the bank. The one that said the matter was already settled and my feelings about it were a footnote. You'll be going to a better family, he said. I was 10 years old. I remember the kitchen exactly. The yellow curtains, the smell of burnt toast no one had scraped, the blue rooster clock above the stove that my mother had picked out at a flea market the summer before, back when she still did things like that. It was 7:14 in the morning. I remember because I watched that clock the entire time he spoke, as if the numbers might change and make what was happening untrue. His name was Nathaniel Ward. He was 43 years old and he managed the largest branch of a regional bank in Columbus, Ohio. He wore pressed shirts even on Sundays. He had handshakes people commented on. He measured everything, always, by its usefulness to him. I was not useful. My mother, Margaret, sat beside him with her eyes on her plate. Her fingers twisted the hem of her apron, the one with the strawberries. She had worn it so many times the berries had faded to pink ghosts. She said nothing. She did not look at me once during the whole conversation, and I understood then that she had known for some time that the conversation at the table was a formality. The decision had been made in rooms I was never allowed inside. When? I asked. He checked his watch. Today, you'll have until noon to pack. One suitcase, only what's essential. I pushed my chair back and walked to my room. I didn't cry. I think some part of me had been waiting for this. The way you wait for a storm you can smell coming in the air. I should tell you who I was before that morning. My name is Claire Ward. I was the third child born to Nathaniel and Margaret Ward, delivered in the spring of 1984 at St. Anne's Hospital in Columbus. My brothers Ryan and Connor were already 6 and 4 by then. I did not know, for the first several years of my life, that my arrival had been a disappointment. Children rarely know the terms of their own existence until someone explains them. Ryan and Connor were everything to my father. He coached Ryan's Little League. He attended every one of Connor's school plays and sat in the front row and clapped the loudest and talked about it for weeks after. He took them to Browns games on weekends. Those boys folded into his sides in the stadium crowd, buying them hot dogs and baseball caps and teaching them to boo the right teams. I watched from the driveway as they drove away. I told myself I didn't want to go anyway. My mother loved me in the way certain women of her generation loved their daughters, practically, efficiently, from a careful distance. She taught me to set a table properly. She brushed my hair every morning with 100 strokes, counting aloud in a flat rhythm. She bought me sensible shoes. These were acts of care. I know that now, but they were never acts of delight. She delighted in my brothers the way she delighted in nothing else, and I cataloged the difference with the precise attention of someone who has nothing else to do. I was 6 when I understood I was different to them, not worse, different. The way a book in a foreign language sits on a shelf beside books you can read, not without value, just inaccessible to the people who own it. By the time I was 8, the difference had a reason. My mother became pregnant in March of 1992. My father announced it at dinner with a kind of ceremonial authority, like he was reading from a document he'd prepared. He said they were expecting a boy. He said it before any test had confirmed it. He said it the way men like him say things, as if intention alone were sufficient to make reality comply. He had the nursery painted blue that April. I helped. He handed me a roller and didn't notice when I painted over my own handprint by mistake and cried a little, quietly, in the corner by the window. He bought a wooden baseball bat engraved with the name Thomas. He showed it to his colleagues at the bank. He passed out cigars. He called this new baby the family's future in a toast at Thanksgiving, and my Uncle Dave laughed and clinked his glass, and neither of them looked at me. I was 8 years old, and I understood exactly what that made me. The baby was born in November, a girl. They named her Sophie. Nathaniel did not pass out cigars. He did not paint the nursery. He sat in the hospital waiting room with his elbows on his knees and his face doing something I had never seen it do before. He looked diminished. He looked like a man who had lost an argument he'd been certain he would win. He was civil to Sophie. He was not unkind, but the temperature in the house dropped that winter and never came back up. By spring of 1993, I had begun to understand that the arithmetic had changed. There were now 2 daughters and 2 sons. The daughters were not assets. They were liabilities. Mouths to feed, years to wait, futures that would belong to other families anyway once they married. That was how Nathaniel Ward thought. He had said versions of it aloud enough times that it had stopped sounding like philosophy and started sounding like weather. One evening that March, I heard him on the phone in his office. The door was open a crack. He was talking to someone about expenses, about the cost of the house, the cost of 4 children. His voice had that calculating quality. I pressed my back against the hallway wall and listened. 2 boys is enough, he said. 2 boys and a future. The rest is sentiment. I was 9 years old. I filed that sentence away somewhere very deep and very cold, and I did not take it out again until I was much older. The morning he told me I was leaving, I packed with a concentration that surprised me. 2 changes of clothes. My library copy of A Wrinkle in Time, which I had not returned and which I would owe 47 cents on. A thought that struck me as almost funny in its smallness. My stuffed rabbit, Clover, whose left ear had been sewn back on twice. A Ziploc bag of pencils. A journal with a red cover that had 3 entries in it. All weather reports, as if I had been practicing for something without knowing what. Then I went to the living room and took the framed Christmas photo photo from the mantle, the one from December of 1990, before Sophie was born. We were all there, Ryan and Connor in matching sweaters, my mother in a red dress, my father with his arm around her, and me in the center front, grinning with one tooth missing. It was the only photo in the house where I was in the center. I put it on top of everything else in the suitcase. I wanted proof I had once belonged somewhere, that there had been a time, however brief, when the center was available to me. My mother came into the room while I was zipping the case. I thought I'd have more to pack, I said. She crouched down and hugged me. It was a real hug. Her arms were tight and she smelled like the strawberry apron, and I felt her breathing change in the way that meant she was trying not to cry. You'll understand when you're older, she whispered. People say that to children when they have done something they cannot defend to a child. Nathaniel drove us to the Family Services building on Broad Street. It was a squat brick rectangle with narrow windows and a flag that needed replacing. He filled out the paperwork at the front desk with his reading glasses on, the pen moving in his neat, practiced hand. He did not look up from the forms. He signed where the caseworker pointed. He shook her hand when it was done. My mother hugged me again in the lobby, longer this time. She pressed her lips to the top of my head and I felt her trembling slightly, and I wanted to ask her why she was trembling when she had the power to stop this and had chosen not to. I didn't ask. I stepped back. They walked out through the glass doors and into the parking lot. Neither of them looked back. I watched the door close. I watched the gray afternoon swallow them. That night I lay on a cot in a room that smelled of bleach and other children's fear, and I made myself a promise. I said it quietly, into the scratchy pillow, the way you'd say a prayer if you no longer believed in the person you were praying to. I will never beg anyone to love me again. The foster system has a particular quality that is difficult to describe to people who have not been inside it. It is not cruelty exactly. It is more like erasure. You are processed. You are housed. You are fed. You are moved. My first placement was a house on the east side of Columbus with 6 other kids and 2 adults who ran the household with the brisk efficiency of a mid-level logistics operation. Everyone had a chore chart. Everyone had a bedtime. The pantry was padlocked after 7 p.m. I learned quickly not to ask for things. The kids who asked were the kids who didn't last. I lasted 4 months. Then I was moved to a couple in Westerville, Donna and Paul Fitch, who called me sweetheart for 3 weeks and gave me my own room with a white comforter and a small desk by the window. I thought, for those 3 weeks, that things were going to change. Then Donna sat me down one afternoon and explained carefully that they had been hoping for a younger child, that they weren't sure they had the resources to address my needs. I didn't know what needs she meant. I had not asked for anything. I had eaten my dinner without complaint. I had thanked them every morning for breakfast. I was packed up and returned. Back to a different house this time, a better one in Clintonville, where a man named Gerald watched sports and a woman named Pat read paperback novels, and neither of them asked me anything about my life or my feelings, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. I stayed there for 2 years. I became a ghost. I became very, very good at school. My grades were the one thing I could control. Every A was a door I could open later. I understood that the way kids from stable homes never quite understand it, as survival, not ambition. My social worker, Elena Vasquez, noticed. She came to see me every 6 weeks, a woman in her early 40s with reading glasses always pushed up on her head and a way of looking at you that made you feel measurable, not small, measurable, like she was genuinely trying to calculate what you were capable of. You're hiding behind those grades, she said to me once when I was 12, sitting across from her at Pat and Gerald's kitchen table. I'm doing well, I said. You're doing well, she agreed, and you're completely unreachable. Those are 2 different things. I didn't have an answer for that. I looked at my hands. I'm looking for something different for you, she said. A specific kind of placement. Will you trust me a little? I had no basis for trusting anyone. But Elena had never lied to me, and in my experience, that was the entire bar. Okay, I said. James Calder lived in a gray craftsman house on Lincoln Avenue in Bexley, Ohio. He was 62 years old. His wife, Patricia, had died of a stroke 3 years earlier. He had no children of his own. He was a retired architecture professor who read constantly, cooked elaborate things on weekends, and had a workshop in his garage full of tools he used with the same care other people used words. Elena drove me there on a Thursday afternoon in October. The leaves were down. The yard was raked, but not obsessively so. There were 2 pots of mums on the porch that had dried out and hadn't been replaced, and something about that small neglect made the house feel lived in rather than staged. James met us at the door. He was tall, with a white beard, and the kind of eyes that did not perform interest. They simply had it. He shook Elena's hand and then crouched down slightly to look at me directly, not in a patronizing way, just in the way of someone accustomed to treating people as if their eye level mattered. Come in, he said. I've made tea. I can also make hot chocolate if you'd rather. He walked me through the rooms without narrating them. He let the house speak for itself. The wooden floors, the shelves of books arranged by subject rather than by decoration, the kitchen with dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, the reading chair by the front window with its permanent dent in the cushion. When he opened the door to what could be my room, he stepped aside so I could look in first. It was plain. A bed, a dresser, a window that faced the backyard. I haven't painted, he said. I thought you might want to choose the colors yourself. No one had ever said that to me before. Not once. The idea that my preference about something as fundamental as the color of my walls was worth pausing for, worth a question rather than a decision, undid something in me that I had been carefully keeping tied. I chose yellow, a warm yellow, the color of afternoon light. James drove me to the hardware store that Saturday. essay, and let me carry the sample cards and deliberate for 20 minutes without rushing me once. The first nightmare came 3 weeks later. I woke up at 2 in the morning, convinced I was back in the Broad Street facility, lying on the cot with the bleach smell. I was gulping air in the dark. Then there was a soft knock at my door. "Claire?" James's voice. Low, careful. "I'm just outside if you need anything." I opened the door. He was standing there in a flannel robe with a mug of hot chocolate that was still steaming, which meant he had made it while I was still coming awake. He had heard me and gone downstairs and made hot chocolate rather than bursting in. He had understood the distinction between presence and intrusion. We sat on the floor in the hallway. We didn't talk much. He told me about a building he had once studied in Kyoto, how the architect had designed the hallways to be slightly narrower than standard, so that light pooled in the open rooms and made them feel generous. Generosity by contrast, he said. The difficult parts make the open parts more open. I didn't say anything, but I remembered it. He built me a bookshelf the following month. I found him one Saturday morning in the garage, surrounded by planks and a penciled diagram. He had drawn it out to accommodate my exact book collection. He had counted them while helping me unpack without mentioning it. "Your books deserve a proper home," he said. That was the sentence, I think. That was the one that broke through whatever remaining glass I had between myself and the idea that this could be real. I was 13 when the adoption was finalized. The courtroom was small and warm and smelled of old paper. The judge was a woman who smiled when she signed. Elena sat in the back and pressed her fist to her mouth to keep from making noise. James put his hand on my shoulder when it was done, and his nod was so quiet and so complete that it meant more than anything anyone had said to me in the courtroom. He taught me to see buildings, not just look at them, see them. He showed me how a roofline could create dignity, how a threshold could be designed to make entering feel like a choice rather than a passage, how the materials a building is made of carry a kind of honesty, that masonry and stone and timber are languages, and a building speaks in them whether the architect intends it to or not. I started sketching whole neighborhoods at the kitchen table while James read across from me. He never told me to stop taking up space with my drawings. He bought me better pencils, he bought me graph paper, he found me books on Le Corbusier and Louis Kahn and Zaha Hadid and left them on my desk without ceremony, as if, of course, these were things I should have. I went to Ohio State on a full merit scholarship at 18, then graduate school at Columbia, then the office I interned at hired me at 26. By my early 30s, I had my own firm, 12 people, studio space in the Pearl District in Portland, Oregon, projects in 4 states, awards that felt abstract until James came to the ceremonies and made them specific by sitting in the front row with his hands folded in his lap and that same quiet nod. Every achievement still felt incomplete unless he was there for it. I noticed the tremor in his hands at Thanksgiving dinner in 2017. He passed the bread basket and his hand shook, and he saw me see it and said nothing. He ate slowly. He pushed food around his plate in a way that was not like him. I asked him about it that night. "I've been meaning to tell you," he said. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in September." He had not told me because he had not wanted to interrupt my finalist presentation for the Cascadia Civic Center project. He had sat with this for 8 weeks to avoid interrupting my work. That was James Calder in its entirety. I did not go back to Portland. I hired a project manager I trusted completely, handed over the day-to-day, and moved back into the yellow room in Bexley. I cooked for him. I drove him to appointments at the James Cancer Center on 10th Avenue. I sat with him through treatments that left him hollowed out and pale and still, somehow, interested in everything. He asked his oncologist detailed questions about the biology of tumor growth. He brought a notebook to every appointment. That winter was quiet and hard and strangely full. We watched the same films twice. We talked about architecture until 11 at night. He told me things about Patricia I had not known, how they had met, the argument they'd had on their honeymoon that became a story they told for 30 years, the way she had laughed. One night in February, rain against all the windows, he took my hand. "I didn't give you enough when you were young," he said. "Not nearly enough of what you deserved." I told him he was wrong. He told me to let him finish. "Build something that outlives us both," he said. "You already are, but don't stop." He died in March of 2018. I was holding his hand. It was early morning. The light was just beginning to come in through the window, and I thought briefly about what he had told me once about how buildings are designed to use morning light, how the architects who understood light most deeply always designed for the first hour, because that's when a space becomes itself. His breathing slowed and then stopped, and the room was very still, and I sat there for a long time before I called anyone. 3 months later, a lawyer named David Morrow called my Portland number and asked if I could come in to discuss the estate. I assumed it was administrative. James had been organized and deliberate his whole life. I expected accounts to close, a small bequest, paperwork to sign that would formalize what we both knew, which was that the house would probably sell and the proceeds would go to the university endowment he had set up for architecture students. I flew back to Columbus on a Wednesday. David Morrow's office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, the kind with heavy carpet and diplomas framed in dark wood. He shook my hand and offered coffee and made small talk that had the careful quality of someone managing their own discomfort. Then he slid a document across the desk. I looked at the number in black ink. The air left my lungs. $27,400,000. The house on Lincoln Avenue, paid off. A portfolio of investments that James had built over 4 decades with the patience of someone who understood compounding the way he understood structure, slowly, deliberately, with confidence and time. The university endowment, yes. His books to the local library. His his tools and workshop contents to the vocational program at a nearby high school, and the remainder to me. David Morrow explained that James had revised the will 3 years before his diagnosis, that he had made this decision with full deliberation, that he had asked David, specifically, to make sure I understood that it was not impulsive. He said to tell you, David said, opening a folded note, that you earned nothing of this, and that was exactly the point. I sat with that for a long moment. I understood what he meant, that love, real love, is not compensation. It is not a ledger. It does not wait for you to deserve it. The man in flannel shirts who made hot chocolate at 2 in the morning and counted my books so my shelf would fit them had been quietly, deliberately building this for decades, and he had chosen me. I was on the steps outside David Morrow's building when the first call came, a journalist from the Columbus Dispatch, then a reporter from an architecture trade publication, then someone from a local news station. Architect inherits $27 million from former foster father. The story was everywhere by that Friday. The doorbell rang on Saturday morning. I was still staying at the house on Lincoln Avenue, unable to bring myself to begin thinking about what came next. I was drinking coffee at the kitchen table when the bell rang, and something, I can't explain it, made me set the mug down slowly, made me move to the door with a kind of careful attention. He was smaller than I remembered. My father always existed in my memory at the scale of a threat, outsized and certain. Standing on the porch of James Calder's house in a well-cut charcoal coat, he had thinned. His hair was silver. He stood with the posture of a man who had rehearsed this moment. Behind him stood a younger man, mid-30s, dark suit, briefcase, a lawyer, of course. Claire, Nathaniel Ward said, 22 years, no phone call, no letter, no forwarded card through the family services office that would have required almost no effort at all. Nothing. 22 years. It's me, he said. He was already moving to step forward, past the threshold, the way men like him move, as if entry is a formality, not something that requires permission. Your father, Nathaniel. I did not move. When I read about your inheritance, he said, I knew it was finally time to make things right. He said that exact sentence. He believed the inheritance was the catalyst for this conversation, and he said so. He did not attempt to pretend otherwise. I give him that, in a cold way. He had never been dishonest about what he valued. Time to make things right, I said. We've missed so much. Your mother has thought about you every day. We want to fix this, Claire, as a family. My mother, I said. Sophie. Something moved across his face. Sophie, my biological sister, now 31, who had grown up in that house, who had been, in the accounting of Nathaniel Ward's heart, equally useless. I had thought about that over the years, that the daughter born to replace me had been no more valued than I was. Sophie as well, he said carefully. I'm sure she is. I looked at the lawyer behind him. I'll need your business card, I said, but I'm not inviting you in. Nathaniel's face tightened. The old authority flexed. Claire, I'll be in touch, I said, through the appropriate channels. I closed the door. I stood in James's hallway, my hallway, with my back against the wood and my heart going very fast and very steady at the same time, and I said, to no one, to James, to whoever was keeping record of these things, no. That night I called a private investigator named Marcus Reyes, who had been recommended to me by a lawyer I trusted in Portland. I told him what I needed. I told him to be thorough. The report landed on my desk 8 days later. I had suspected financial trouble. I had suspected desperation underneath the tailored coat. I had not suspected everything. Nathaniel Ward had retired from the bank in 2019, 2 years earlier than planned. The reason, buried in the report's third section, was a formal complaint filed by 3 junior employees regarding systematic misrepresentation of loan risk on commercial accounts. He had not been charged. He had not been prosecuted, but he had been asked to leave, and the terms of his departure had included a non-disclosure agreement and a reduced pension. The house in Columbus, the house I had grown up in, the house with the yellow curtains and the rooster clock, had been refinanced twice. They were behind on the second mortgage by 4 months. Ryan had borrowed $60,000 from Nathaniel in 2020 that had not been repaid. Connor had moved back in at age 38, following a divorce, and was not contributing to household expenses. The lawyer behind Nathaniel on my porch, his name was Brett Holloway, and he specialized in estate and inheritance litigation. He had been retained 6 days before Nathaniel rang my doorbell, before Nathaniel had even called me. The meeting on my porch was not a reconciliation. It was an opening move. I read the report twice. Then I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my attorney in Portland. The second was to Sophie. We had not spoken in over a decade, Sophie and I. We had found each other once, briefly, through a mutual connection, a cousin I barely remembered, when she was 23 and I was 31. We had exchanged a few careful emails. She had been living in Cincinnati. She had sounded like someone who had survived the same weather system by developing entirely different coping mechanisms. She picked up on the second ring. I was waiting for you to call, she said, not unkindly. The way you say something when you have been sitting with it for a while. How long have you known? I asked. That they were coming to you? She was quiet for a moment. Dad started talking about your inheritance about 48 hours after the news story ran. I heard it through Ryan. He said you owed the family. His exact word. Owed. I closed my eyes. He's not well, Claire. Financially, I mean. He's scared. I think he's been scared for a long time, and he's just made of the kind of material that converts fear into strategy. Brett Holloway, I said. Another pause. You did your homework. Did you know about the lawyer before I called? I found out 3 days ago. I tried to reach you, but I only had an old email. She stopped. I'm not part of this. I want you to know that. Whatever he's planning, anything, whatever he thinks he's entitled to. I'm not part of it. I know, I said, and I did. I had known it before she said it. We talked for 2 hours. We talked about the house and the blue nursery and the way Nathaniel had said the family's future at Thanksgiving and how that toast had been equally invisible to both of us. We talked about the way we had moved through that house like unwanted guests at a party, present, fed, occasionally acknowledged, and fundamentally beside the point. Sophie was a nurse in Cincinnati now. She worked pediatric oncology. She had 3 cats in a small apartment and a life she had built with her own hands, away from Nathaniel's calculations, and she sounded like someone who had made peace with most of it. Do you want to meet? She said near the end. Yes, I said. Soon. I met with Nathaniel Ward once more, on my terms. My attorney's office, not his. No Brett Holloway. I required that in advance. Just Nathaniel and me, across a conference table with my attorney, a woman named Patricia Cho, present and prepared. He arrived 10 minutes early, which told me he was nervous. He sat down across from me and looked at me for a long moment with something I couldn't quite name. Not guilt. Something adjacent to it. The recognition of cost without quite the willingness to call it by its right name. I'm glad you agreed to this, he said. I want to ask you something, I said, and I want you to answer honestly, because I have already had you investigated, and I will know if you're not being honest. He stiffened, but he nodded. Did you retain Brett Holloway before or after you came to my door? 3 seconds of silence. Before, he said, quietly. So the conversation on my porch about making things right was also genuine, he said. He leaned forward slightly. Claire, both things can be true. I am in a difficult situation financially. I won't pretend otherwise, and I do. He stopped. I do think about what we did, what I did, what you lost. What I lost, I said. You mean my family? Yes, you mean the childhood I didn't have because you decided a daughter wasn't worth keeping. His jaw tightened. It was a different time. The expectations stop. I said it simply, without heat. I'm not interested in the era as an explanation. I'm interested in what you actually want to happen here. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to something thinner, something that might have been real. I want my daughter back. I'm not your daughter, I said. I was never your daughter in any way that mattered. You had the legal paperwork changed. You handed me to the state. The man who was my father died in March and you didn't know his name. His eyes moved. Something in them shifted, not softened exactly, but opened slightly, the way a room opens when someone turns on a light you didn't know was there. James Calder, I said. He was a retired architecture professor in Bexley. He built me a bookshelf. He made hot chocolate at 2 in the morning when I had nightmares. He drove me to the hardware store and let me pick the color of my own walls. He loved me without conditions and without strategy. He left me $27 million because he spent 4 decades building a life and he wanted me to have it. That's my father. Nathaniel Ward said nothing. Whatever you and Brett Holloway had planned, a challenge to the estate, some legal theory about family obligation, some argument about your rights, I want you to hear this clearly. There is no argument. The will is ironclad. Patricia has confirmed that there are no grounds for a contest. And even if there were, even if a judge somehow gave you the time of day, I have more resources than you to sustain litigation indefinitely, and I will use every one of them. He looked at the table. We're done here, I said. I want you to leave my name out of your conversations with Ryan and Connor and whatever you've told them about what you expected to get from this. And I want you to go home and find a way to solve your problems without me. Patricia opened the conference room door. Nathaniel Ward stood. He was smaller than the man I remembered. That was the strangest thing. The collapse of scale. The giant of my childhood was just a frightened old man in a good coat who had run out of options and tried the one door he had no right to knock on. He walked to the door, then stopped. I'm sorry, he said. He didn't look at me when he said it. He said it to the wall, or to himself, or to some version of the past that I was no longer the custodian of. I know, I said. He left. I sat for a moment in the quiet of the conference room. Patricia was at the window giving me space. I looked at my hands on the table. I thought about the yellow curtains. I thought about the Christmas photo I had taken from the mantel with such determination, proof that I had once belonged somewhere. I had been wrong about what that photo meant. I thought it was evidence of belonging. It was actually evidence of something else. That even in the middle of a family that didn't want me, I had known instinctively and with 10-year-old certainty to document the moment before the break, to preserve it, to carry it forward. That was never about them. That was always me. The weeks after that meeting had their own texture. Ryan called once. He was 39 and he had some of my father's cadence, the flat authority, without my father's intelligence to make it credible. He said I was being selfish. He said family was family. He said there were people who needed help. I told him I wished him well and ended the call. Connor called twice. The second time he left a voicemail that began with an apology and ended with a request for $60,000. I did not return it. My mother, Margaret, did not call. That surprised me. Then Sophie told me Margaret had been in the hospital in January with a cardiac episode, nothing fatal, but serious, and that she had refused to discuss the situation with Nathaniel afterward. Sophie said Margaret had cried when the news story ran, that she had kept the article, that she had told Sophie she hoped I was happy. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't, entirely. My mother was not a villain. She was a woman who had made a catastrophic choice out of submission to a man who did not deserve her submission, and she had spent 30 years of quiet erosion paying for it in ways she probably never fully articulated even to herself. I sent her a card, a short one, no promises, no accusations, just my address and my phone number and a sentence that said I hoped she was well. She called 3 weeks later. We talked talked for 40 minutes. She cried twice. I held the phone and listened and did not say it was fine because it wasn't fine. But I also did not say it was unforgivable because I had made a decision, not for her sake but for mine, that I would not carry this as rage anymore. Rage is heavy. I had better things to lift. Sophie came to Portland in September. We met at a restaurant in the Pearl District 2 blocks from my studio, and we sat across from each other and looked at each other the way siblings who have been separated for most of their lives look at each other, searching for the features, the gestures, the things that are shared even when nothing else is. We had the same hands. Neither of us had known that. She stayed for 4 days. She walked through the Cascadia Civic Center project with me on a Saturday. The building still under construction, exposed steel and temporary walkways, morning light coming through the east-facing glass panels the way I had designed it to, pooling on the concrete floor in long rectangles. It's beautiful, she said. It's going to be, I said. She laughed. It was a real laugh, unguarded, surprised out of her. You sound just like him, she said. I looked at her. The way you talk about it, she said, like it's already what it's going to be, and you just have to wait for it to catch up. I hadn't known I'd pick that up, but I suppose that's how it works. The people who build us into something better, they become the architecture. You don't notice the walls. You just know the light is right. There is no clean ending to a story like this. That is the first thing I want to say. I live in Portland now. My firm is 15 people. The Cascadia Civic Center opened in April, and a critic from an architecture journal called it the most emotionally intelligent civic building built on the West Coast in a generation. And I thought about James when I read that, what he would have said and what he would have been too modest to say. The house in Bexley sold in November. I kept the bookshelf. Nathaniel Ward is, as far as I know, still in Columbus. I have not heard from Brett Holloway. The estate was never formally challenged. I suspect the investigation report and Patricia Cho's letter together communicated what a conversation might not have. Margaret and I speak once a month. It is careful and genuine in the way that things are when both people understand the terms. I will never have the mother I deserved. She will never have the daughter she abandoned and then failed to fight for. We are building something smaller than what was lost, but we are building it honestly. Sophie is coming for Christmas. What I know, the thing I have turned over and over until it became true in the way only repeated contact with the truth makes things true, is this. You cannot give people the power to define your worth and then be surprised when they misuse it. My parents named me worthless when I was 10 years old, and I spent years carrying that verdict as if it had been delivered by someone qualified to issue it. James Calder was not a perfect man. He was a widower who ate toast for dinner too often and forgot to replace his porch mums and occasionally repaired things around the house that didn't need repairing just to have something to do with his hands. But he saw me clearly and again clearly, every single day for 23 years. That is the whole of what love requires. Not perfection, clarity, consistency, showing up at the door with hot chocolate when the nightmares come. My parents threw me away because I was born a daughter in a house that had decided daughters were a cost. And then a man who had no obligation to me at all, a stranger on a referral list in a social worker's file, chose me anyway, quietly, completely, for keeps. When Nathaniel Ward stood on my porch and told me he wanted to make things right, he meant he wanted access to what I had built. He did not understand that what I had built was not money. The money was incidental. What I had built was a self, careful and specific and hard-won. From the yellow paint on the walls to the buildings that stand in my name to the sister I am learning, slowly and honestly, to know. That self was not made in the Ward house. It was made in a house on Lincoln Avenue by a man who counted my books and built them a proper home. I carry that with me, into every building, into every room I designed for light. His hands don't tremble anymore, but I still feel them.